80s, and thank God we don't have to sing such a song about Syria in 2014. I'd like to welcome Johnny Achi from Arab Americans for Syria for an update on what's going on in Syria. Welcome, Johnny.
Hello, Didan. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Can you give us an update what's going on in Syria? Because the situation in Ukraine has kind of dominated the media, and the situation in Syria has kind of been held back. And we need to kind of keep abreast of that, because sometimes that's a subterfuge used for the United States to take offensive military action.
One major topic we can talk about, maybe in another minor one. The major one is, of course, the attack on Kassab. It hasn't taken the amount of media attention it should take. It's a small town on the Turkish border, northwest part of Syria. After the Syrian, of course, the last 2-3 months, the Syrian army have made huge advances on the Lebanese border and pretty much defeated and got rid of all the Al-Qaeda after it was able to successfully release the 16 abducted nuns that were with Al-Qaeda, with Nusra Front, from the town of Yabrud. 24 hours later, the army, after securing the release of the nuns, was able to enter Yabrud, take down the Al-Qaeda flag, and raise the Syrian flag. In response to that, Turkey felt they needed to, start another front. So on the eve of Erdogan's, his party was for election for the mayors of Turkey. It was a major election, maybe the most important in the last 40, 50 years, because it was going to give, where does Erdogan stand with his Muslim Brotherhood regime after the fall in Egypt and all those other, all the Islamist regimes are falling right now. Erdogan used that attack on Kassab. Again, it's a small town, majority Syrian Armenians, okay, and we know the history between the Armenians and the Turks. On the eve of the election, he attacked with about 5,000 mercenaries. Most of them are Chechens, Afghans, and Libyans and Saudis. In one of the Al Jazeera reports, I watched how they're talking about the Syrian opposition freeing the town of Kassab. The Syrian opposition that they were interviewing, they had to translate from Chechen and from Afghan. The Jazeera reporter had a translator to translate to Jazeera listeners what these Syrian oppositions were talking about, because they were talking different languages. So these people who are coming from abroad, they're freeing Kassab from its inhabitants. We know what freeing means. It's an occupier, and the people of the town would free it from the occupier. Here we have the opposite. We have invaders helped by Turkish. We're talking about aerial assault. They downed the Syrian plane, and the pilot, of course, when ejected, fell in Syrian territory, and the Turkish story was that he was well into Turkish territory. He fell 7 kilometers into Syrian territory. He was, of course, carrying operations against the terrorists, the mercenaries coming into Kassab. Now, the problem with Kassab, of course, it's Armenian community. Thousands of Kassabis had to evacuate, and they were trying to be, they were attacked, and some of them were killed by this mercenary. So this fight has been raging from March 21st, almost 2 weeks now to the day. We went, the whole world is, we went into, last Friday, into the Turkish embassy. There was about 500 people of us protesting, Turkish involvement. So Turkish is trying to, again, trying to raise up the volume because of the success of the Syrian on the Lebanese border. Now we're going to have the south with Israel, the north with Turkey. It's an ongoing thing. They want to make sure that the Syrian army is working on all fronts. Here's a question for the United States and the United States audience. Is the Al-Qaeda and these mercenaries, are they friend or foe? Are they allies or they enemies? We need to make sure, because Bush and Cheney back in 9/11, 2001, told us that Al-Qaeda was identified as the biggest enemy of the United States. And you ask any American today in the last decade and a half, who's number one enemy, they will tell you Al-Qaeda. Okay, now today, Al-Qaeda is the reason President Obama is still justifying fighting the same war in Afghanistan after 13 years. This is the excuse we give the American public why we're justifying why we're spending on annual defense budget greater than the entire rest of the world combined spend on their annual budgets, okay, on defense. This is the same explanation we're giving why we lost our civil liberties with the Homeland Security rules. This is the same explanation we're given why thousands of American brave men and women lost their lives in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. That same excuse we're giving the American that Al-Qaeda is our enemy, then yet we designate Al-Qaeda as our enemies, then we go and support them in certain places. Why over the last 3 years, more taxpaying dollars are going to Al-Qaeda? And Libya, why immediately after the U.S. NATO bombing, okay, the first people on the ground were the Al-Qaeda fighters? So we need to ask that question. And why does Al-Qaeda keep showing up at U.S. surrogate troops on the ground like in Syria and in Libya, carrying, anytime they want to destabilize a country or trying to do a regime change? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Al-Qaeda is kind of coming back. Yesterday on the Telegraph, British magazine and newspaper, they talked about earlier the United States and the Gulf monarchies initiated the propaganda effort. We spoke on your show how they changed the names. One time it's the Syrian Army, Free Army, then they call it Nusra Front, then they call it ISIS, then they call it the Free, Army of Islam. It's the same people. There's over 100,000 jihadists. None of them is moderate. But the Telegraph explained how millions of US dollars are going to these, what the United States continue to call moderate jihadists, to fight now the ISIS and to fight the Syrian government. It's just...
You're absolutely right. It's like a moderate devil, moderate evil, It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. The next topic I want to briefly touch on is that Bashar Jafari, our permanent ambassador to the United Nations, has given a letter to Ban Ki-moon and to the United Nations, similar to what we submitted in 2012 about a possible chemical attack. Nobody took us seriously when Bashar Jafari gave plenty evidence, and we know what happened in March of 2013 and again in August in 2013. There is this very strong evidence that in the town in Jobar, where the stronghold of these terrorists, which they're losing ground, the letter explains intercepted communique that they might use another attack to put it on the Syrian government. So I'm talking about it right now in advance, just like Bashar Jafari talked about it in advance. These people were stop at nothing to try and topple, the Syrian army and the Syrian regime. And then, so that's another, important point.
Well, we thank you, because you've been very good for the last 3 years in forecasting the future moves of Turkey, of Qatar, of Saudi Arabia in this whole matter. And we got to wrap up. But I find it profound that President Obama will go to Saudi Arabia, who's a major financier by all accounts, including United States intelligence agencies, of Al-Qaeda throughout the world, and not raise that issue, not even raise the issue of oppression of women, the most brutal oppression of women in the world, and give him an award. I guess the dollar diplomacy has overridden the notion of values, ethics, and morality, which should be the guiding principle of any truly democratic nation, any truly democratic progressive president. But we have to roll on. But I thank you very much, Johnny Achi, from Arab Americans of Syria. Next, we're going to have Hamid